Welcome to the Data Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We have the session here every Friday, 11 o'clock Central European Standard Time, to allow you, the audience, to essentially ask questions about Data Vault, any data-driven technologies, cloud computing, MPP stuff. That's all cool. Yeah, every question is allowed. Use the chat here if you want. If you want to raise a live question, you can use the Q&A functionality here in the client, or you can just raise your hand if you want. I'll also show you a link to a form where you can submit your questions for later for one of the subsequent sessions essentially. If you receive multiple questions, I would cherry pick, and it's typically time box 10 minutes roughly. If there will be no questions at all, I will talk about the cluster here, my little side project. That's we did once at least. So over summer break we were low on questions, but at the moment it looks good. But keep asking questions, all good. So I have my stack essentially. Okay. So we received one question. Let me just share my screen here. So this is about modeling timesheet data essentially. And so they're working on the data warehouse. Let me just move my screen here. They're working on a data warehouse and they have a raw data vault already for some resources, people, projects, and allocations. So that's the model down here essentially. And now, so you see the resource hub, some satellite, the project hub, some satellite, and the link, that's the resource allocation essentially for the project. Yeah, what I wonder is, first of all, for this model, what about the effectivity satellites? When resources get deleted, for example, when you remove an employee from the organization, or when you remove the project from a data set here, right? Then you might need effectivity satellites on these hubs here. On this link, maybe as well. Not sure if there's any deletion flag here on the satellite. If that's the case, you could get away with it. Otherwise, I might add. And this looks like a multi-active satellite. Oh yeah, multi-active. So in this case, you also want to have a effectivity satellite from when to when a resource is allocated to a project, or at least the keep track of the physical deletion of the assignment essentially. What if in the source system these resources get just not assigned anymore to the project? The record gets removed. The foreign key is not now null or something, that kind of stuff. Okay, so just be aware the effectivity satellites might be missing here. Okay, sorry for that. So there's some more. That's a base model. Now they want to add the timesheet data here, essentially. And that's where the problems start, essentially. So they got some timesheet data. They got a resource business key from the more or less matching the previous model. So they got the business key of the resource, how matching the H resource. Okay, perfect. They got some data, which is 100% populated. Some project business key. In some cases, it's matching the hash key from the project hub or the business key from the project hub. In some cases, it's free text. So I assume there is something in there, some key or whatever, but it does not match one of the previous project business keys. Or maybe it's just some free text, my side project, that kind of stuff, right? And then in many cases, also null. Then they got a task ID. The ID is from task, usually from customer side, no master data. In many cases, in 50% of the cases, also null. And the task name, just a free text, many cases just null. And some work hours, because I mean they keep track of hours. That's at least 100% populated. All right. So, and then it says, okay, at least one of these project business keys task IDs, so project task IDs, and the task name is always populated. So only at least one of those three. Okay. The problem is with duplicates. So for example, you could have on the task name, they just put administration. So even though maybe all three are populated one way or the other, at least one of those is populated. There's also, it doesn't guarantee uniqueness. That's my understanding here. Let's go through business requirements. So let's see data we get, or they get. And let's talk about the business requirements. They need to keep track of timesheet changes. So somebody modifies the work hours, for example. And we need to keep track of allocation plan versus hours delivered, at least on project level, excluding rows missing project business key. Okay, so, okay, and the problem most probably is because of the free text here. Okay, so let's start with the second one. That's the easier one. So what you do is, a hub is always loaded from all the source tables. So when you have, let's say, a project data set where you have the description of the project, where you receive these hash keys from, essentially, let me just jump back. You're loading this from somewhere, right? Some source table delivers you the project data with the business key of the project, with some descriptions and so on. That's one source. But then the other source that you're now adding are the timesheet data. So the timesheet data is also a source, and all the business keys that you have here in project business key, you just add to the hub. No matter if they match your other project data source or not. There are business keys here referred here. And even if it's free text, I don't want to say 100%, but most probably, without looking at, I don't know your data good enough, right? I don't know your data at all. But without looking at the data, my first bet would be to just load even the free text into the hub. As bad as it sounds. Maybe if it's a problem, create a new hub, a new project hub, and later link it. For those business keys where they match, you essentially establish a business rule in the business vault where you have not two project hubs, one project hub, which you already have, and the timesheet project. Let's call it like this, timesheet project hub. And then in the business vault, you establish a business rule that says, okay, if the business keys match in both business keys, both hubs, then you establish the link structure itself. It's essentially. So that's how you later deal with this. So that's relatively easy to solve. Just load those business keys from the second source into a hub and link it. That would be most probably my best bet, because I don't know what the free text here really means, how bad it is essentially. That's the issue. All right. If it's not too bad, let's say, if they're just business keys, which if it's really business keys to some extent and not really free text, not free long text, that kind of stuff, descriptions, that kind of stuff. If it's really business keys, but it just don't match your project table because maybe the projects have been deleted in the meantime, then I would most probably load this into the same hub. And then, rely on the integration of the hub, essentially. All right, so that answers the second question here, I believe. Yeah, that answers it. And then you can establish the relationship on the project level for analytics, essentially, later on. So that's an easy one. The next one is we need to keep track of timesheet changes. Well, before we do that, let's capture the data first, and then we think about how we capture changes to the data. The problem we're facing is, first of all, I would use a non-historized link for capturing the timesheet data. Non-historized implies not history, right? We'll talk about that when we answer the question here on the changes. But use a non-historized link for capturing your timesheet data. That's number one. For that, you need to establish a unique identifier for the incoming records. So every tracking, you want to have a unique identifier. And that's the biggest problem here, because when you look at the potential business key candidates, they might be null, they might be, they are null in some cases. And it's only the combination that might work, but not when the task name is duplicated, right? So if everything is null, and let's say you said at least one is always populated. If it's the task name, we got a problem because this is not unique. This is not a unique identifier. If this would be unique, you could say, let's take the combination of those three elements, make sure it's somehow included in the link, either by hub reference, which you would have for the project business key, for example, and maybe for a task ID, or add it as clear text to the non-historized link and include it in the hash key computation, as if this would be a weak hub reference. Doesn't work because your task name is not unique. And if it's the only populated field, you got a problem now. So what I would do is I would do some data profiling now. I would look at the relationship between the task name and the date, for example. Are the resources keeping track of the same task name at the same time? If that's not the case, the structure of the non-historized link would essentially include the following hub references. Resource hub, that's the resource reference here. The project reference, the task ID and the task name, I would just add to the non-historized link structure, the date as well. Not as hub references, not hashed, just as clear text. And all of those elements here, if those are unique in your source data set as a combination, right? If that's your alternate key in your source data set, I would also use this as an alternate key in the non-historized link. Derive the hash key for the link's primary key from it, and that's the hash key essentially. And then I would also add the work hours as a measure value to the link structure itself, because I don't want to join something for the aggregation here for performance reasons. So in a training, we discussed essentially that you can denormalize. Well, first of all, you have to establish the unique identifier for your incoming transactions. That's what I first did, right? So most probably it's all 5 elements if all of them are unique in your data set. And I would also look at the risk in the future. So data profiling to the past is a big deal, actually, because but you make an assumption. The assumption is what did not happen in the past will not happen in the future. And nobody can look into the future. Nobody can foresee the future, right? But it gives you an 80%, let's say you're reducing the risk, but there's still some risk left. And so look at the remaining risk. How big is the risk that this will violate essentially in the future, or is already violated in the source data set? If it's violated in the source data set, or if you say, well, the risk is that this will blow up, in this case, first of all, I would go to the source system. What you need is a unique identifier per timesheet record. And if it's a technical ID or something, you don't need to have a natural business key or something, but some unique identifier coming from the source that identifies each timesheet. Maybe it's getting updated, fine, but you need some unique identifier. If this is not uniquely true, then we need something from the source. Now, they're saying, well, we don't have that, right? So then the whole project is bust? No, we need to find a solution. The problem is the solution I have is really bad, and you don't want to use it. Okay, so it's worse than discussing essentially and arguing with the business why you need this additional field from the source that uniquely identifies your timesheet records here, timesheet entries. So the solution I have is a bad one, really bad one, and you won't like it, promise. In the staging process, so when this one assumes there's nothing that how you can uniquely identify each timesheet entry, right? There's nothing left and no other option. In the staging process, we introduce a subsequence value, sorry. So every record that we stage, either in a data lake, in Parquet files, Avro files, whatever, or in your relational staging area, we attach a subsequence ID. There's multiple reasons for this. One reason is, and that's typically not documented because we don't want to suggest this, so I regret this will show up on some video streaming platforms, but so be it. This subsequence ID identifies the staged record. It does not identify the source record, right? Just identifies each staged record. We typically use it for multi-actor satellites. We use it for identifying true duplicates and to maintain the order of the staged data. That's the three major reasons why we use it. But if I have nothing else left, I could use it also for identifying the incoming records, right? It's bad because what if the source data gets loaded again? You will have duplicates, okay? And that's the bad part about it. So because I'm not a wizard, so I have to do something here. The source cannot deliver any identifier, so I have to essentially deal with those duplicates later, okay? So for the raw data vault, if the source cannot deliver any identifier, anything unique, maybe this combination is unique or they have something else how we can make it unique, I would go for the subsequence from staging, use this as a TID element, as a transaction identifier in the non-hysteresis link. As bad as this sounds, I fully agree, I'm fully with you, and capture the data in the raw data vault. And then you need to establish a business rule in the business vault, how you deal with all these duplicates. How can you essentially recognize that a record is the same, describing the same entry, including the other problem that's still unsolved, that you have changes on those timesheet entries. And you will have issues with this, promised, lots of issues. So I'm not arguing here to always use this approach, right? It's my last resort if I have no option at all. Then I go for the subsequence value. But before you do that, go to the source system. They should have something, or every solution, every different solution is better than the one I just recommended, right? Just be clear. All right. So, but this sequence ID, the subsequence ID could be used in this case for the worst case scenario, but you have to clean it up as good as you can in the business vault. And if they won't provide you anything, well, then it's an approximate. That's all you can up with essentially, because you have no better data. That's what it is. If they want better than you approximate in the reporting, well, then they have to deliver more data. That's the basic idea. So they won't like it as well, hopefully. All right. So those are the things. My hope is for you that those elements here, the resource business key, the date, project business key, task ID, task name, in combination is a unique identifier already. Let's talk about tracking these timesheet changes. Let's say you have resource. There you go. So let's say we have a resource hash key in a data set. We have, I'm working on the non-hysteresis link essentially, how we capture these changes. I mean, there's two options. You could use a effectivity satellite on the link, but that's a bummer because it's inefficient. You have lots of data in these tables typically, in these non-hysteresis links, and joining the effectivity satellite would be a performance issue, essentially, especially when you move the non-hysteresis link on a column-based storage, then you don't want to join, essentially. So I have the resource identifier, and I have the project identifier. Those are the two elements that come to my mind. And then I have essentially the hours. And I have a load date timestamp. When did I receive the fact? And I have the working, some date essentially, some DTS, date timestamp. That was the activity when the activity happened essentially. And I leave some space on purpose. And people who went to the class most probably know the story for that. All right, so let's say the employee A worked on project B and tracked a couple of hours, let's say 5 hours. We received the record on day 1, and it's a tracking of day 1. Let me leave out the task name and so on. I just assume this allocation here is already unique. So you might need to add some more fields to this nonsense link, as we just discussed. And then you recognize a change. They updated the work hours from 5 to 7. They just made a mistake or something. There's 2 options now. You could track in the nonsense link the delta, 2 hours. I would do that. What I would do is I would always keep essentially track 2 records on a change. Get rid of the old fact into the new fact. So get rid of the old fact first, A, B minus 5. That's a transaction. We recognize the change on the source data set the next day. So that's the record comes in on the load date 2, and the transaction still, or the tracking is still valid for day 1. And then into the new fact, 7 hours. Then this column here, let me call this counter column. And the counter column indicates if the record is coming from the source or if you generating this, what we call a technical counter transaction. So if the record comes from the source like this one here, okay, so if it's coming from a source, you use the counter column to indicate it with a 1. If you calculate this, you use a -1. The idea is this. I'm using 2 records because it's easier to calculate or easier to load. Let's assume you have let's assume for now you have full load in staging of all these entries essentially, right? If there's a record in staging where it's not in a target, in the nonsense link yet, you're loading it. If in a target there's a record which doesn't exist in staging anymore, that's a record which is gone, either because it got deleted from the source or it got updated. Okay. No matter what, you essentially you introduce a counter transaction, a technical counter transaction, where you load the record from the target, which is missing in the source, into the target again as a negative value. That's the basic idea. It's easier to load, and it will also cover both inserts and updates and deletes essentially. So I'm using, there you go, 1 -1 here and 1 here. And then let's say they do another update on the hub references now. It wasn't the resource A, it was resource X that essentially is now tracking the hours. They just didn't update on the business key. Get rid of the old fact into the new fact. So A, B -7. This transaction comes in on day 3. I mean, that's when we recognize the change. Still day 1 -1 into the new fact X, B 7, day 3, day 1 1. And now when they delete the record, I'm skipping freebies here. Well, there's no freebie here. But when they delete the record, get rid of the old fact into the new fact. So X, B -7, D3, D4, D1, day 1, and -1. And because there is no new fact, you can't insert anything. So here I can use this column here to figure out how many transactions or timesheet entries I have for for all these records. So on day 1, I have 1 transaction, 1 entry, which makes sense. After day 2, for A, I have still 1 transaction, 1 entry, because I have essentially 1 - 1 + 1 is 1. Behind those 3 records, I have 1 timesheet entry. But then something interesting happens on day 3. It wasn't the resource A that tracked the hours, so the sum for resource A is 0. Because for A, when you group by the resource, you essentially have 0 entries for resource A on day 3. And then if you count the numbers for X, well, there's 1 entry for X. It's just shifted, right? And here the sum is 0. So that's how you identify deleted records, essentially, which you want to filter out in your facts, essentially, on day 4. The cool thing is you can go back and forth in history now on the load date timestamp. On the technical visualization, you can see what is the current state today. when you just aggregate across all the records. And when you want to see, well, what was the state before yesterday? So you just filter until load date of yesterday, aggregate data, and see the state of your data yesterday, essentially. It's really cool. So that we use in banks, for example, to capture booking transactions and so on. That's the basic idea. Because yes, even in banks, records can change. That's another story. All right. Cool. So that's I hope that answers it. Let me clean up here and share my screen again. Oh yeah, a couple of issues here, a couple of topics that we had to discuss essentially. But good, very good question. And thanks for the upload. Yeah, if you have a question like this, use this form here if you want, sfr.ee/dbfriday. That's where you can also, just like this this attendee here, can upload maybe in a UML picture or some picture essentially. Some whiteboard scribbling would be nice and good enough typically, as long as people can read it, right? That's all good. Don't make it too big. This one was perfect, to be honest. All right. Yeah, also check out our other webinars at Scalefree. When you go to this link down here, there's a DBT and a Warescape webinar at the moment, once a month. So also where you can register for it and watch the session essentially. Really cool stuff. All right, cool. And if you have more questions, I do this only once a week. We also have a Q&A with the DVIC team, with Knowles and Julian from Ignition once a month. So also great to join. So many questions there. We have a forum at the community, so we can also post questions if you want. Yeah, check it out. And yeah, if you can't wait or want to wait for a longer session or back and forth discussion sometimes, it's also very engaging with Knowles. All right, cool. So yeah, sign up for free here. It's all good. Thanks for joining. Hope you enjoyed today's session. Sorry for overstretching the time a bit today, but yeah, as I said, the question I thought it's much easier, and then when I was reading it was a good one. So enjoy it, enjoy your weekends, and see you hopefully next Friday. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining today. If you'd like to discuss this further, give us a call on the number below here, and we're happy to discuss this with you. See you next time. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.